All right, cool. Yeah, let's get started. And if anybody joins later, they will be able to catch up with what you're doing. So welcome, everybody. My name is Cesar, and this is Remixing the Web, an introduction to browser extensions. I would like to start this by doing a land acknowledgement, and I want to thank Don and Simone, whose ITP Camp workshop this is inspired from. So we acknowledge that we're gathering virtually, but our bodies are located on the unceded lands of the Lenape people, past and present. We honor the land and give gratitude to the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. At the same time, we recognize that Black Lives Matter and that there is no justice or peace until everyone is afforded humanity and dignity. Thank you. All right, so the plan for today, we're going to start off with a short round of introductions. It's going to be a pretty informal session. And then we're going to take a look at a few precedents and examples of browser extensions created in an art context. After that, I'm going to give a brief technical overview of what browser extensions are capable of. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time creating a Google Chrome extension from scratch. So it's going to be a pretty hands-on session. If you want to follow along for the practical part of the workshop, make sure you have Google Chrome installed on your computer and the text editor, because we're going to be writing some code. These are the only two requirements, and if you don't have them, you can just start downloading them now. Excuse me. And then, yeah, you'll definitely be ready to go by the time we start building the extensions. Otherwise, you can, of course, follow at your own pace afterwards. We're recording this session, so the content is going to be there. Right, so feel free to stop me at any point with questions about the content. And if I'm not being responsive to what's typed in the chat, please speak up. I'm switching between a few different windows, and I might not see the chat all of the time. And we'll save some time at the end for troubleshooting, especially if you're following along with the coding and need like individual help. We can do that at the end. So yeah, we're gonna be building an extension from scratch, but at the end, after the workshop, I'm going to send an email to all of the participants with the GitHub link that contains basically what we're gonna be building today. And feel free to start using that as a starter code, for any future projects. Last point on logistics, I've loosely timed this session. It should take about an hour and a half, but knowing myself, we might run over. Feel free to hop in and out as you feel. It should be easy. All right, so first part, let's get to know each other a little bit. I didn't really know how many people are going to show up. It looks like there's 17 of us right now, so it might be easy if we do this over the chat. If each one of us could type our name, our gender pronouns, where you're physically located right now, and your favorite color. We're gonna be dealing just a little bit with colors. It's gonna be random colors at some point later, but it would be good to know what everyone likes. I'm gonna pause for a few seconds for everybody to introduce themselves. Oh my God, so much green. Love it. Blue, teal. Green or black. Green team all the way. Wow, this is such a good mix of locations. Cool. All right, so my name is Cesar. As I mentioned in the beginning of the session, my gender pronouns are he, him. I live in New York, but I've been in Virginia for the past few weeks. And I think I am also team green. I really love the color of grass at night, kind of under artificial light. So that's like a shade of green. I'm also an artist and programmer and a current ITP student. I just completed my first year at ITP. All right, so why care about browser extensions, or why do I care about browser extensions? And I kind of struggle with this question a lot because I feel like they're almost invisible in the ecosystem of the web, and they are very specific to individual browsers. they need to go through a store in order to be published to the wide world. They kind of take the worst parts of the web and of apps and bring them together. So I feel like there's a lot of reasons to hate them. But at the same time, I really like seeing them as tools for taking back some of the agency and the experience of being online. I think these days the web is very much a read-only place. And I believe knowing how to work with extensions can give us a stronger voice in engaging with and commenting on content that has been published already. Like the way I like to think about it is that if the web is a book, a browser extension can function like a highlighter or a pencil that shows your personal angle on existing content. At the same time, I think extensions are great tools for online performances that use the web browser as a medium. This is quite a niche, but I think there's a lot of potential in these online performances for social and political commentary. And at the same time, they can do everything a website can do and more because they give us access to the browser's behavior. And I think this is a strong value proposition if you're interested in working with the web browser as an art medium. And then again, there's also a market for products and for more commercial things with the browser extensions. So we're going to look at a few browser extensions in the context of internet art, extensions that are going to exemplify some of my points from above. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions about any of them or like want to discuss any of them in more detail. All right, so this first one is called Untranscender. It's made by Dex Digital, and it's an extension that replaces text on all websites that you navigate to. I'm sure you've encountered some of this. A really popular one a few years ago was one that was changing the word millennials to the word snake people. This one, however, changes the phrase transcended race to was deemed safe by white people. And another quite similar one is one that was published by the National Institute for Reproductive Health Action Fund, and is the same kind of extension. This one replaces pro-life with anti-choice. I think both of these show how like small gestures done with quite simple extensions can become political tools or statements. The next example is Ethical Ad Blocker by Darius Kazemi. Probably most of you are using or are familiar with ad blocking extensions. They're the things that make sure we don't get overwhelmed with ads in our online journeys. This one is built on the same principle as the popular ad blockers, but it's kind of taking the issue of online ads into binary black and white space. So this extension does not allow you to visit websites with ads at all. Like whenever you go to a website that's serving ads, this one replaces the whole website with the page you see here in the image. It says, sorry, this page is ad supported. It would be unethical to view this site. And like, of course, this makes the web practically unusable. Most websites that we go to often are using ads. So it feels like this extension is made more as a commentary on the tension between us as users wanting free content and ad-free content, and then publishers needing to monetize their work somehow. Another example, Research. This is an extension that makes image search more gender balanced. Like as you've probably noticed, searching for images for terms such as engineer is like very heavily biased towards white male representation on most search engines. And this extension proposes like a better variety of results. I've tried it, and unfortunately it doesn't work great, but I think it's still like a really good intention, like a really good idea for a browser extension. There's a lot that can be done in that space. This is a very different example. It's called Decodilia, and it's a privacy-focused extension by Melanie Hoff. She's an amazing artist and educator, so check out her work outside of this too. But this extension is meant to be used with a special pair of eyeglasses that she produces. And it uses a technique from color theory in order to render a web page kind of garbled to the naked eye, but legible to those wearing the glasses. So whenever you want to read some content that you don't want anybody else to understand, it's something that can be used. Sontflop. This is an extension developed by one of my favorite graphic design studios, Too Much Studio. It's a pretty simple tool for people working with typography on the web and design in general to replace the fonts on existing web pages with just different typefaces, just as a way of like testing and iterating on designs. Let's see, I'm here and there. This is one of my favorites. It's like a really simple and beautiful project. It's made by this internet artist, Jonas Lunz. Check out his work too. It's an extension for him only. And this extension takes whatever website he's on at any time and shows it to the public. It broadcasts it on a certain website. The website is called imhereandthere.com. It's a pretty old project. It's 7 or 8 years old, and it's not currently functional, but I think what it was is like a really intimate way of sharing something about yourself online and about your online behavior. The next one is called Self-Surfing, and it's done by the same artist, I think, with a pretty similar intention. It feels like it's expanding on the work from the previous example. And in this project, there are 2 different extensions, one that the artist is using and one that's being used by the viewers. The extension that's being used by the viewers turns their browser into a clone of the artist's browser. So for example, when Jonas Lunz opens a new tab and goes to the New York Times website, the same thing will happen on the user's computer. So it becomes a web mirror for the actions of the artist. And like, it kind of takes that issue of privacy and intimacy from the previous project and applies it more literally and more expansively to everything that's happening inside of the browser, as opposed to just the address bar. Glanceback, this is one of my favorites. I just learned about it this morning from a newsletter, so I added it to the presentation at the last moment. It's a project by Maya Mann from the Google Creative Lab, and it makes the computer look back at you. So whenever you open a new browser tab, this Chrome extension takes a photo of you, places it in the background, and gives you a reflection prompt. And it's just a way of kind of creating a dialogue between you and the computer. Her premise is that we're looking at the computer all of the time, but like we don't get much in return, and this is an attempt to address that. Let's see, Safe Book by Ben Grosser. This is from a few years ago. And I'm feeling like I should have really added ears to these slides, because it's kind of crazy to think that some of this internet artwork is aging and we need ears in order to give it context. But this tackles the issue of kind of dangerous content on Facebook, fake news or content bubbles, and proposes a kind of tongue-in-cheek solution of removing all of the text and imagery from the site while leaving the other parts of Facebook in place. So it kind of makes you ask yourself, like, what is Facebook if there's no more text and images? And I think it's quite beautiful to just see the naked structure of it. The next one is quite similar. It's called text-free browsing, and it's pretty much the same thing but applied to websites across the internet. And I think it's very similar in execution and what it looks like, but I think the intentions in the build were different. This one is built by Raphael Rosendahl and Jonas Lunz, who are both internet artists. We've seen Jonas Lunz already. And I think that their intention is to like care more about revealing the inner structure of a web page and exposing HTML elements and making us look at the form of the web rather than tackling content on Facebook in particular, like the previous one was doing. And this is going to be the last example. It's called abstract browsing, and it's got a quite similar concept to the previous one. It's about revealing the inner structure of the web. But instead of removing just the text, it abstracts the entire content of a web page, turning everything into colored blocks. And I think this is a really beautiful way of revealing the skeleton of the web and like showing what HTML really means visually, and of just turning a web page into a minimalist piece of abstract art. And Raphael Rosendahl, who is the author of this, also turned this project into a series of weavings and carpets that ended up being shown in a bunch of galleries and museums. I'm showing this one last because we're going to be building something quite similar to this for our practical part of the workshop. All right, any questions so far? All right, cool. Let's move on to the more technical part of the presentation. So what exactly is a Chrome extension anyway? It's basically a very simple website. It's just some HTML, some CSS, and some JavaScript code that lives inside of the browser and that is allowed to use some of the APIs that the browser is offering us. So it gives us a little bit more power over the control of the browser. And what exactly what exactly is this extended power that we're getting over the browser? There's a lot to it. Like you'll see that in this session, we're really just scratching the surface of this topic. Like extensions look very innocent and low-key and small, but there's a super rich set of functionalities that they're capable of. There's a tiny link at the bottom of this slide that goes to the Google Chrome extensions documentation. You can also find it if you do an online search for Chrome extension API or anything similar. I'm going to walk through some of the categories of things that extensions are able to do, and I'm going to be highlighting the stuff that we're going to be covering in the more practical example today. So extensions can modify and observe the web browser, as Google puts it. This means that they're able to interact with a user's bookmarks or browsing data. They can like open tabs and manage windows of the browser. They can manage the downloads, or they can access the browser's history. Like a large set of the things we can do in the browser as users can be automated or built through programming using extensions. So like, of course, a lot of this stuff contains sensitive personal information to the user of the extension. So the extension needs specific permissions from the user for managing each one of these browser capabilities. So whenever somebody is installing an extension, they are asked whether they allow the extension to do those things, kind of like when you log in with Facebook to a website. At the same time, they can modify and observe the web, meaning that they can access the active tab in the browser. They can read and change the contents of a website that's currently being visited, navigate to different websites, set or change cookies, do screen captures, and so on. And again, all of these can only happen by getting a user's permission. And the difference between these two categories, modifying and observing the browser versus the web, is kind of blurry, but one of them has more to do with the content, like the websites you visit, and the other one deals a little bit more with the container, the browser itself. So from these two categories, today we're really going to be interacting only with content scripts and the active tab. We're going to make a simple extension that changes the contents of an existing web page. And like it looks like it's not much, but it's actually a lot of power that's being offered by these two categories. Extensions can also allow you to customize, just like create a basic user interface for the extension. And from here, we're going to be just touching on the browser actions, which is really like the bare bones of setting up an extension, giving it an icon and like making it show up in the extensions bar. But you can also change context menus, make it show something when you right click on a web page, and all of that. There's the utilities category. These allow us to, like, these are the parts of code that we need in order to like ask for user permissions, to pass messages between different components of an extension. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a bit. There's a lot of security that is being built into the architecture of how extensions work. They allow us to run background scripts as opposed to things that are just active on the current web page. So that's often used for communication with the server. We can also manage other extensions from an extension and so on. From this category, we're going to be touching on the message passing. We're going to be needing that in communicating between the extension's user interface and the script that changes the content of a web page. And we're also going to be dealing with permissions. All extensions need to ask for permissions. And lastly, there's functionality for like packaging, deploying, and updating the extension. So if you create a product or you create something that you're ready to publish, sending it into the Chrome store. And you can also, if you're a developer, you can expand on the development tools with extensions, but we're not going to be talking about much of that today. Are there any questions so far? All right, cool. If anything comes to mind, feel free to send a message or stop me at any point. We're going to move into the coding part of this workshop. So get your text editors ready if you want to follow along. And again, like feel free to stop me at any point with questions if things are not clear. If any like more individual troubleshooting comes up during the walkthrough and we figure it takes up too much time, we can also do it at the end of the workshop. So I'm going to exit this presentation. Can you all still see my screen? Okay, great. And the first thing that we need to do is to create a new folder. We're going to be really making this from scratch. So I'm going to make a new folder in my Finder. I'm going to call it ITP Camp extension. And I'm going to open a text editor with this folder. All right, it's my text editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code. You can use anything you'd like. It's just an empty folder. I'm going to now create a new file. This is the very basic file that needs to exist in all extensions, and it's called manifest.json. And this is basically the configuration file of the extension, the file where we tell the browser what the extension is called, what permissions it needs, and what kind of code we're writing. And this follows the traditional JSON format. It's going to be an object. We're going to give it a name. ITP Camp extension. I'm going to give it a version. And here we can just say 1.0. We're not going to have to care too much about this version, but it becomes useful. Oh yeah, absolutely. I meant to do that, but I forgot. Is this big? Is this good enough? All right, great. So yeah, there's a name and I just typed ITP Camp extension. There's a version where I just typed 1.0 and I was saying how that becomes useful further in the development process. We also need to give it a manifest version. And this is just a property that Google Chrome requires in order to know kind of what version of the API we're using. We're just going to be using version 2. And I think this very rarely changes, only when Google makes changes to their APIs. And we can also give it a description. We're just going to say this is our first Chrome. All right, believe it or not, this is a valid Chrome extension with just one file, the manifest.json. At this point, I'm going to transition into my Google Chrome browser. And can you all see my browser? Okay, great. And I'm going to navigate to Chrome://extensions. Once you're on this page, in the top right corner, you'll see that there is a toggle for developer mode. Mine was turned on. It's originally turned off. Make sure to turn that on, and that will open a toolbar with 3 buttons that say load unpacked, pack extension, and update. This is pretty much what it looks like. It allows us to load an extension into Chrome that did not come from the Chrome extension market. So if you hit load unpacked, you should be getting a window, and if you just select the folder of the extension we just created, the one that has manifest.json inside, if you hit select, you will see the extension appearing in here. This is our extension name from the manifest, ITP Camp extension. This is the version we've given it, the description, and then there's a unique ID that Chrome generates for our extension. Great. All right, so any questions so far? All right, cool. So yeah, again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I mean, now that we have a very basic functional extension, we should make it do something. But before we do that, we're gonna do a very quick theoretical interlude. I'm going to be showing two images. 1 second. All right. So there are basically three types of JavaScript scripts that a Chrome extension can run. And they are the background script, the pop-up script, and the content script. And these all have kind of different functionalities, and they are all contained, meaning that like in more technical terms, it means that each one of them is running in its own JavaScript context. So you cannot call functions or cannot do any communication from the pop-up script into the background script. In order to do that kind of communication, we need to use Chrome's message passing API. And the reason for this is a security reason. The the content script is the script that interacts with a page's content. So we can write any JavaScript in there that changes the content of a website, and it behaves as if that script came with the website that we are visiting. The pop-up is the JS and the HTML. They have to do with the user interface of the extension. So for example, if we look at this extension, it's not opening up. It's basically this, the user interface that the extension implements, which is implemented like a regular website. And then the background is used for, it's not specific to one tab or to one website, it just executes in the background of the browser. And this is used a lot for communication between everything, for talking to a server if the extension is more complex, or for various other actions. Today, we're going to be looking mostly at the content scripts and the pop-up. We're not going to be dealing with the background at all. And we're going to start by creating a content script that interacts with a web page. And once we've created the interaction that we want, we're going to move on and create the user interface for our extension. All right, so going back into our manifest, we need to tell the manifest that we're going to have a content script. And as I was saying, extensions are very particular about security, just because the regular web makes sure that JavaScript is very containerized inside of the browser, but extensions allow JavaScript to control the browser as well and do more things. So extensions want to be aware of all JavaScript files that are part of the extension. So we need to create a field called content_script. And this field is an array that contains an object that contains a few fields. This is kind of confusing, but it's all in the documentation. So we're going to have the first field in here. We're going to call it JS, and this is where we specify the JavaScript files that we write. This is going to be an array, and we're just going to create a script called content.js. And we can also create the new file for the script. We're going to call it content.js and save it. It's going to be empty for now. We're going to finish changing our manifest, and then we're going to come back in here and write some code. Any questions so far? All right, great. Aside from the JavaScript object in here, we also need to specify a matches object. And this one means the websites that we want our extension, or like rather our JavaScript code, to be applied to. For this first example, I'm just going to have Google in here, and we're just going to do our first test on Google, and then we're going to expand it to a larger variety of websites. So I'll just say http google.com and https google.com. And the third object that we want to add in here is a run_at object, and this is a property defined in the documentation that's just document_start, which just means that the extension should run when the document starts. Yeah, the whole language in this manifest.json again is quite obscure, but it's all specified in the docs. So this is good for now. We should be able to go into our content.js and print a very simple debug message and see if our browser loads the extension. So I'm just going to do a console.log. This is our extension, and this should be running when we go to google.com. If we open our developer console, we should be able to see this message. Before we do that, we need to refresh our extension since we changed the code. So in the Chrome /extensions page, hit the refresh button on our extension, and we get an error which says failed to load extension. Could not load manifest. So that means we made a mistake in our manifest file. All right, now you're gonna have fun observing me debug this. Content scripts matches.
Does manifest version need to be in quotation?
I don't think so. The manifest version, like we can remove the content scripts and reload the extension. Oh, I see. There's a trailing comma in here. Yeah, I think the manifest version is fine because that's a number as opposed to a string. But let's see what doesn't it like about the content scripts. Let's remove the matches for now and see if that works. The brace is here, the bracket is closed, run a document starts, the JavaScript needs to be an array. All right, let's try this again. Oh, I see. So the matches field is missing or invalid, which means that the matches field is mandatory. So we're just going to add it again. Matches. We're going to do oh, maybe it needs a star afterwards just to tell it that we are matching everything. Okay, so maybe the star was missing in the previous example. I'm going to re-add the HTTPS version of this. HTTPS. And reload the extension. All right, so now we can open our developer console. If you right click on a page and open the console, and we're going to navigate to Google. And it didn't show up. Great. In that case, let's change the extension again. Let's just make it match all of the websites and make sure the problem is not coming from the fact that maybe Google has a www in front of it. So if we just say http star.star/star, this is just going to match all of the websites. And then again, https star/star. Going to save. We're going to reload our extension. Going to disable and reload Google, and we get our message. This is our extension coming from the content.js script. Are you able to see this? Yeah, coming from the content.js script. Yeah, I assume earlier when we were matching just google.com, maybe it's a www issue or something else. We're going to keep it as all websites for now. All right. So now that we know that JavaScript is running in the browser on this website, like the world is our oyster. We can do anything we want. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to make the background color of this page green, because we're all team green. So let's see. I'm going to leave this console log here just so we make sure that our extension loads every time. And I'm going to change our background color to green only after the content of the web page is loaded. So we're going to add an event listener for when the content is loaded. And inside of that event listener, I'm going to make the style change. So window.add event listener content loaded. This is an event that gets fired by the window object whenever the HTML has been retrieved and loaded. And then we're going to do a callback function event. We're not going to use the event. We don't particularly care about it. We just want to execute this code once the HTML content was loaded. Let's do an alert first. The website is now loaded. And make sure that our event listener is working. So let's go back in here, refresh our extension, refresh Google, and we're getting our alert. The website is now loaded. And we're also getting our message in the console log. All right, so now we can just change the background color. So we can access the body object by typing document.body. And then we can change the style of this by accessing the style attribute, the style, and then dot background color. And then we're going to make it green. Oh yeah, how do you get to the console command option? Yeah, thank you, Zeo. That's very useful. It's a little bit annoying that you have to refresh every time you make changes. It's happened to me before that I would refresh my website and not really know what's going on. You have a bug in the manifest. Yeah, I can paste the manifest that I have here. So we saw our alerts, and then the background color of the page turned green. And this should be happening on all websites that we visit. Maybe certain websites declare their CSS differently, so we might not see the effects of it everywhere, but we should be seeing some parts of it turning to green. All right, so any questions so far? Should we, yeah, let's take 30 seconds for everybody to catch up and ask questions if there's anything, and then we're going to move forward. So let's go back to Google. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's give the background color, the background a random color every time the page is loaded. And we're doing this in order to like build up to the exercise that I was talking about with making each one of the HTML elements a different color. So we're going to go back into our content.js, and as you saw this, we get this message every time the page is refreshed. So what we need to do is create a function for generating a random color in this JavaScript file, and then instead of changing the background color of the body to green, we're going to change it to the random color. One CSS trick for doing colors is that instead of using the HTML names, we can use the RGB function, the RGB CSS function. So we can specify the red, green, and blue. And this is useful because it's easier to generate a random color if we're working with numbers rather than like the dictionary of HTML colors. So if we say, for example, 200, 00, this should be a reddish background color. I'm just going to test it really quickly. Okay, so we have a red. one different trick, one way of doing JavaScript strings. You can use the regular apostrophes, but you can also use backticks, and these are kind of smart strings that allow you to have numbers or variables inside. So if you use the dollar open curly bracket, close curly bracket notation, you can have numbers or even variables in there. So if we give red, which is 200, and then 0, 0, we should be getting exactly the same result in our extension. I'm going to refresh, and it's still working. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 variables, RGB. We're going to change this RGB function to use the 3 variables. And then we're going to need to set RG and B to random values between 0 and 255, which is what range the colors take. So let's see, R equals get random number, random color. And this get random color channel is a function that we're going to create. The red, the green, and then the same for the blue. And let's create this function. We're just going to say var get random color channel equals function. All right, so we need to generate a random number between 0 and 255. And we can JavaScript has a function called math.random. And this math.random generates a random number between 0 and 1. So we need to change the range of this from 0, 1 to 0, 255. Fortunately, it's easy. We can just multiply it by 255, and we're going to get a value in the range that we need. And the numbers going inside of the CSS RGB function, they need to be integer functions. They cannot be floating point numbers. So we're going to need to turn this into an integer number, and we can do that using the parseInt function. So if we just return this function, we should be getting a random color every time we load our web page. Let's see if that worked. All right, so we're getting random colors. Oh, these look quite beautiful. Random colors every time we reload. For now, I'm going to remove this alert and try it again. All right, great. Any questions so far? Was the random color generation clear? All right. Okay, so now we're going to move on to giving each element on the page a random color, right? Like so far, we've only been changing the background color of the body. We want to do that for every single element on the page in order to achieve an effect of like stacked rectangles. And we can do that using the children property that's present in most HTML elements. First off, I'm going to create a function that does this style change, and you will see in a second why. So let's see, var style change equals function, and we'll give it a DOM element as a parameter. I'm going to cut this line and paste it in here. And instead of document.body, we're going to call it on the element that's passed as a parameter. So we're changing the background color of whatever element comes into the function. And then we're going to call the function for document.body. So it's called do style change for document.body. All right, let's test it again and make sure we didn't break anything. It should be doing exactly the same thing as before. Oh, that's a mistake. All right, so we have R is not defined. Oh, I see. Okay, so we need to move all of this color generation inside of the function too. Wait, let's try again. Okay, so it looks like it's still working. And we want, instead of just doing it on the body, we want to like trickle down to all the children of body, and then the children of body, and children of children of body, and so on. So we're going to do a for loop. Actually, first we're going to save the current element children in a variable. So let's say let children equals element dot children. And children, again, is a property that's found on any HTML element. And then we're going to do a for loop on the array of children. So for var I equals 0, I is lower than children.length I plus plus. And the first thing we're going to do is we can just print to the console log the current element, all of the children of body. Console log children of I. Right, so in terms of visuals, this code does exactly the same as what we were doing before, but now we're printing to the console of all of the children of body. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to reload my extension. And you see a bunch of different HTML tags inside of the console log. Lots of meta attributes, a bunch of style attributes, some scripts, and then a div. And probably this div contains the contents of the page. So we need to go kind of down this chain of HTML elements. The way we're going to do that, it's actually very simple. We're just going to hide this console log for now, and we're just going to do to recursively apply this function to all of the children. So if we just call do style change, we're going to save the current child into a variable. So var child equals children of I, and then call the do style change function for the current child. And this is going to apply to all of the children of body, and then for each one of their children, each one of their children, and eventually get to the entire HTML page. Let's see what that does. I'm going to clean this. All right, so we see a bunch of colors. There's still, it doesn't quite look like the art that we were looking at, but like we're gonna get there, we're gonna slowly get there. Are there any questions so far? Oh my gosh, David, I just saw your question in the messages. How do you load up the Chrome extension again? Did you manage to figure that out, or do you want me to go over it again? We can leave the code on the screen and wait for a little bit longer for everyone to catch up, and then we're going to make the text disappear. Okay, I'm going to move forward and do a few more things. The code so far is pasted in the messages, and yeah, I'll try to go a little bit slower, and then there's going to be plenty of time at the end for questions and troubleshooting. So let's go back into our browser window, and ideally we would want also these images and the text to disappear. Let's say we want to just be left with the abstract shapes. One kind of quick and hacky way that we could make that happen is to make the text transparent everywhere. So we don't delete it, we just like pretend it's not there by making it transparent. And we don't particularly care whether an element has text or not. We're just going to apply this to all elements. And we can do that by just setting the color, the CSS color of that element to transparent. So if we just type element.style.color equals transparent. Background color and color are different properties. The background color, I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory, but usually color applies to the text that's inside of an element, and background color is just the background. So if we reload our extension and refresh our page, we see that the text from the Google buttons disappeared. On the hover state, it reappears. I assume there's some custom JavaScript with custom CSS that's being run at that moment, but the original one that was there is not there anymore. And nor is the text for the links at the top of the page. If we do an inspect element, or if you highlight it, you see it's still there, but we just made it invisible. All right, let's try this on a different website. Let's try the New York Times website and see what happens. Okay, so it kind of worked, right? Like we're still seeing some text, which we're not really supposed to be seeing because we said that all of the text should be transparent. We're still seeing images. We're going to deal with the images in a little bit. We're going to hide them. We're seeing ads, which are kind of different. And then, yeah, we're seeing even more text. But for the most part, we see that the content was turned into the colors that we want. We also realize that as we scroll down on the New York Times page, it's kind of got that like infinite content implemented, where when you reach the bottom of the page, it loads more stuff in. This is expanding the HTML structure of the page, and our extension doesn't retroactively apply things to new content that was loaded. So we're going to deal with that in a second. But first, let's make sure that we hide all images as well. Any questions so far? All right, let's do something. We can hack it for the images like we did for the text as well. Usually images are presented in the IMG tag, or in the SVG tag if they're vector images. So we can just do an if statement asking for each one of the elements, hey, are you an image tag? Are you an SVG tag? If you are, then we're going to turn you into an invisible element. So we can just say if element.tag name is IMG, and the tag name property tells you what kind of element we're dealing with. Is it an div? Is it a span? Is it an IMG? Is it a body? Is it the whole document? Or what is it? Or element.tag name is SVG. Or so yeah, we can also test for the source attribute. Usually an image has a source, which is the link to the image. And we can check if the current element has a source attribute. If it does, it's likely an image or a video, and we're fine with hiding it. So we're just going to change its style to its visibility style property into hidden. We're going to say element dot style dot visibility equals hidden with quotes around it. Right, this is just like a very hacky, quick and dirty way of detecting which elements on the page are images. HTML and JavaScript allow for a few different ways of placing images on the page. There's the IMG tag and the SVG tag, but then there's also a background image CSS property that can be used in order to attach images to elements that are not of the IMG or SVG tag. There's also videos that we're maybe covering some with this, but we're not covering all of them. So this is not a general solution, it's just a very quick one. So let's go back into our extension. Let's reload it. And let's try reloading the page and seeing what happens. Okay, so you see our images disappeared. We were getting, I guess we're still getting the ad, but the New York Times logo is not here anymore. There was an image here for one of their podcasts that are not here anymore. So they disappeared. We're still getting some text, and we're still getting some images here. And this is probably because the images are loading in the web page after our script executes, right? So like the way our script is working is that whenever the page is triggering its DOM content loaded event, which is right on the page load, we are calling our style change function. But I assume the New York Times page is going to do something smart about lazy loading of images or loading things gradually. And yeah, that means these images are getting loaded after our script executes. So one thing we could do in order to apply our style changes even after, we could just do a simple mechanism where when we press a key on the keyboard, we call this function again. So if we scroll down for a while, for example, new content gets loaded, we want to apply our style changes to the new content, we can just do that by hitting a key. And the way we can do that is by listening for the key press event. So we're going to comment this out for now. We're not going to change the style anymore when the page is loaded. Let's test that really quick. So we load the page and nothing should happen. Let's make sure it loads. Okay, so we are back at ground zero, and we're going to add another event listener for a key press. So in here, we're going to say window.add event listener in the same way that we did with the DOM content loaded event. But this time, we're going to be listening for the key press event, key press. And then again, we're going to have a callback. And we can print to the console whatever was pressed. So let's just do console.log event.key. Event.key is going to tell us the key on the keyboard that was pressed. So if we go back into our extension, we refresh, and then I'm just going to go to Google again because New York Times is a pretty heavy page. And I'm going to go to the console, and I'm going to hit E on my keyboard, and you can see the E key appearing in here. Hit T, hello, and all of that, right? So our Chrome extension is capturing our keyboard presses right now and printing all of them into the console. And we want, let's say we want to apply our style changing script whenever the user presses the key Q. So we can just change our code and add an if statement in here, check if event.key is a Q. And if it is, we can call our do style change function in order to apply the style changes whenever we want to. So if event.key is equal to Q. Andrew, yes, of course. Give me 1 second to finish this if statement, and then I'm going to paste it. So if the key that was pressed is Q, we can call our doStyleChange function. All right, let's make sure this works. We can reload our extension. Okay, nothing is happening, and then whenever I press Q, it turns into the blocks. I guess it's hard for you all to know that I'm pressing Q. You're just gonna have to believe me. Okay, so I'm going to paste the code into the messages, and we are going to let's just take a 5-minute break, and that can be for catching up with everything. It can be for questions, or it can be just for a break. And I'll start going over stuff again at 5:14, but I'm here to answer questions. Okay, oh, I see 2 questions in the chat. I'm curious how you learned to code. You explain, oh, thank you, that's very kind. I don't know, I started coding quite a while ago. I used to do competitive programming when I was in middle school and high school. I was coding, yeah, I've been coding since I was 10 or so, but web programming only for a few years, for the past like 4 or 5 years, something like that. Yeah, I did computer science in college too. And Mandy, can you explain again what the children section of the code does? Yes, of course. Let's see. Where are we? I'm going to move this back up where it was, just so we don't get confused. So we have the event listeners, and this is here. Yeah, so element.children really just gets, okay, let's take a look at the HTML of this page. There's a lot of it, and it's kind of ugly, but you see how the web page is it's written in HTML, right? And like HTML has a hierarchical structure where it starts with an HTML tag, and then it has tags that are nested inside of it. So in this case, HTML is the parent tag, and this head is one of the children, and body is the second child. Body, if you open it up in this interface, has a bunch of different children, right? And like all of these are really the HTML elements that make up the page. Where it gets more interesting is when we get to this div, which we see highlighted in the browser, right? And like this is kind of the container element for the entire website. And then if we go through the children of this div, we should be finding we should be seeing various things being highlighted, right? So for example, there's this div that we see highlighted in the middle of the screen where the search box would be. And the children of this element would be this script, and then a div which is at the top, and then a form. And then the form has a bunch of children itself, which is another div and another div, right? So this is kind of going, like that piece of code is accessing the children initially of the top element, which is the body, right? So initially we say, okay, this is the body. We're just going to go through this meta, this meta, this meta. Fortunately, the meta don't show any content. It's just the divs and a few others that do. But we're starting with the children of the body, and then using this call, which is like we're recursively calling the same function, we apply the same operation to all of the children. Okay, cool, thank you. Sorry if that was too detailed or too long. All right, any other questions, or should we move on? Okay, cool. let's take another like 30 seconds to look at this on a few other websites. If you have any requests for websites, just like drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm gonna do the New York Times one again, just to make sure that it's generic enough. What was the key Q, I think? Okay, so it changes most things. There's still some text that doesn't get changed. And we're gonna go all the way down, load some new content, and then if I hit Q again, the new stuff is going to disappear. If you wanted to turn this into something that's more like production ready, one possible way to deal with this would be to set up an interval and call this function every 5 seconds or every 3 seconds or something, so that whenever the web page changes dynamically, the Chrome extension applies its own changes on top of the new content. That's a very like simple way of doing it. There's probably smarter ways to deal with it as well. Okay, cool. So we're at 5:18. The session is running until 5:30. How are you all feeling? We could go on for another like 20 minutes, and I could show you all how to do a user interface for the Chrome extension, or we can just dedicate the next 15 minutes to other questions or technical troubleshooting, and then end on time. You can type in the chat or speak up if you have preference for one or the other. Okay, we have 1 for user interface, 2 for user interface, 3 for user interface, 4 for user interface. Okay, cool. Yeah, then yeah, let's move on and do a user interface. If you need to leave at any moment, feel free to. Again, the session is recorded, so it's all good. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the bottom line of this first part is that you can really manipulate the page in any way you want, right? Like in the same way that you would be making a website and you would be having some JavaScript that interacts with the HTML of your website. In this case, you add a JavaScript script that manipulates the HTML of a website that's on the internet. And of course, only you are able to see that, or like the users of the extension. But yeah, it offers a lot of freedom of dealing with existing content. One thing that I didn't show, but that's pretty easy to do, is to bring in external dependencies. So if you want to work with a library, say you want to add a P5 sketch to a website, or you want to use jQuery, which is this convenience library for JavaScript and DOM manipulation, or you want to make a website sing with Tone.js, it's quite easy to do. All you need to do is download those scripts. So you can't access an external dependency from an online place. You need to download it on your computer and then place it in the same folder with the extension, and then extend this JavaScript field of the content scripts and say that, okay, we have one other script which is called, say, p5.js, and then maybe tone.js, right? And all those need to be saved in the same place, and then you're able to use those inside of your original script. But we're going to move on to building a very simple UI for our extension. And yeah, let's just make it such that instead of having to press Q on our keyboard to change the colors of the website, we're going to click on the extension, a button is going to show up, and we're going to click that button, and that's going to make our changes. So first thing that we need to do in order to give our extension a user interface, we need to tell manifest that we're introducing a UI, and we do that by adding this one field called browser action. Browser action. This is an object that contains another object called, another field called default underscore popup. And then we need to give it a file name. So in their language, in their terminology, the UI of the extension is called a popup. So we can just call it popup.html. Let's not forget to add a comma after this. And the other thing we're going to do in here, we're going to use it when we make the user interface talk to this other script, is add some permissions. And in the permissions, we're going to add active tab. All right, so we've added the permissions, we've added a popup.html file, which we still need to create. We haven't created that quite yet. All right, this should be good. So let's open up a new window and just save it as popup.html. All right, so taking a step back, the user interface of a Chrome extension is just an HTML page. That's it. It's just like creating a website, but it shows up in the browser when you click on the extension button. So we can just start with a very simple HTML page on open and close HTML tags. Do open and close body tags, and we can let's see. Let's also do head tags. And let's just add some text in here. Heading 1 text, this is the user interface. All right, so just by changing the manifest JSON to having the pop-up browser action and creating this popup.html file, we should be able to see the UI showing up in our extension when we click on it. Let's see if that works. I'm going to refresh the extension. Let me go back to this website, refresh just to be sure, and click. And we get our very simple HTML page, which says this is the user interface. Any questions so far? Were you able to follow along this far? All right, in that case, I'm going to move forward and let's add a, yeah, as I was saying, we want to add a button to this user interface, and whenever the user clicks on the button, we want to change the elements of our, to change the colors of our elements. Remember in the beginning of the workshop when I was talking about the different types of scripts that you can use, that there was the background script, the pop-up script, and the content script. Because of these differences, we cannot directly call our do style change function from JavaScript that's being executed in this HTML. We're going to need to use the APIs that Google Chrome makes available to us to pass a message and tell the content script that the pop-up script would like a change to be made. So let's first things first, let's just create a button and a JavaScript file to deal with that. So we'll use the button tag, ID equals, we'll call it action button. And we'll just put some, call it change colors in the text, okay. And let's also create a popup.js file, which is going to be the JavaScript that gets executed when the user clicks on the button. Let's include that script from the popup.html. So script source equals popup.js. And let's make sure that this script gets executed. So we can just ask it to console log. Okay, let's see here. Extension. Okay, so we see our change colors button. However, we don't really see our pop-up executed message in there. I'm going to move on to, yes, I can show my code. No, popup.js doesn't need to be included in the manifest. I'm not quite sure why that is. I think for the content scripts, all of them need to be included in the manifest. However, for the pop-up ones, you have a little bit more freedom, but I don't have a good answer for that. So this is the HTML for the pop-up, and the JavaScript is a simple console log. And in order to see the console log of this pop-up, we need to hit inspect elements on the user interface of our extension itself. That's going to open a different developer console. And in there, we're going to see pop-up script works. So this is a manifestation of what I was talking about earlier with the different JavaScript contexts, where there's like one JavaScript context running on the page, which is what the content script is executing in. And then there's a different one, which is running for the UI, which is what our pop-up script is dealing with. So I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this this console here and go back into our code and add an event listener for when the user hits a button. So let's see. Inside of our JavaScript, we want to say document get element by ID, and we gave our button an ID, which was action button. Don't forget to put it between quotes, and add event listener for click, and then the callback function. And let's just put a console log in there for now. And we should also make sure to only add this event listener when the button exists. So we're going to do the DOM contents loaded window event listener again. So window and event listener. And we're going to place our click event listener inside of the larger event listener. All this means that we attach a click event listener to the button once the user interface of our extension was loaded. So let's see if that works. Oh my God, so many windows. Okay, I'm going to refresh this. I see. Inspect the element again. Open up the console. Oh my God, so complicated. And hit change colors. Okay, so now we're finally getting the button was clicked console message. All right, so now what we want to do, we're gonna do one very simple instance of the message passing between the different contexts. Whenever whenever this button is clicked, we're going to send a message to the other script and tell it to run the color changing code. So in order to do that, the syntax for it is really, really clumsy. I don't exactly know why it's that clumsy, but you will see. So there is this object called Chrome, which is only available in extensions in general, right? Like when you develop a normal website, you don't have access to this, but because we are in an extension, we can use it. And we're going to say chrome.tabs.query active true, current window true. So what we're doing is we're talking to the Chrome API and asking it, hey, can you please give us a list of all of the tabs that are currently active and in the current window that the user is in? And that's going to have a callback with an array of tabs. So let's print those tabs and see what happens in there. Right, chrome.tabs.query, active true and current window true. You can find this again in the documentation for the Chrome extensions. All right, so let's see, let's reload our extension. To this tab. All right, let's inspect the elements. Look at our console, click on the button. So we get our initial message, the button was clicked. Let me make it bigger. And then we get another object, right? Which is an array with one object inside, which is Chrome's representation of the tab, right? So it gives us a bunch of information about it, whether it's active, whether it's audible, whether it's an incognito one, whether it was pinned, if it's selected right now, what the URL of the tab is, and so on, right? So like probably the project that I was showing earlier with Darius broadcasting, the website that he's currently on was using one of a functionality pretty similar to this. All right, so we're going to be using this information in order to pass we're going to use this object in order to pass the message. You see how the tab has an ID. So we're going to send a message to this tab ID. It seems like Chrome's message passing infrastructure has to do with these IDs, and the content script that we wrote at first is executing within the JavaScript context of the tab with ID 42 in this case. So we're going to call another Chrome function. It's going to be chrome.tabs.sendMessage. And then the first parameter is the tab ID. So we're going to say tabs of 0, which is the first element in our tabs array, .id. And then we need to pass it the actual message, which is an object that we make ourselves. Let's just create a variable for it. Var message equals, it's just going to be a very simple one called simple object with one property called change colors, which is what we're going to make true. In our case, the content of the message doesn't really matter. We just want to send the other script a signal saying, okay, now execute the function. So it can be any kind of object. So the first parameter is the tab ID. The second one is the message. And then we are going to have a callback function for the response. So the other script can respond to this message. All right, and we're not going to do anything with the response quite yet. All right, so what we have so far, whenever the user presses on the extension button, we're going to send a message to the other script, and now we need to receive the message on the other end. So let's go back to the content.js script, and we need to add an event listener for that message. This is a different event listener than the window event listener. This event listener is working on the Chrome object, the same one that we used earlier in the popup script. So we're just gonna say chrome.runtime dot on message dot add listener. And then this takes a callback function. It's really quite complicated syntax. I don't know why they didn't make it simpler, but yeah. So we add a callback function with a few parameters. There's a request, there's a sender, and then there's a send response, which allows us to respond. All right, so in here, let's first print the request and see what we received. Request. Let's also print the sender and the send response just to see what we're dealing with. Sender. Response. All right. So let's go back into our extensions, reload, and then open up the console again. This time it's going to be the website's console. Let's open our extension, click on the button, and nothing happens. Great. All right, let's make sure that the message is being sent from the other console log. Okay, so we have an error when sending the message. It says unchecked runtime last error, could not establish connection, receiving end does not exist. Great, that might be an issue with the manifest. Let me check another manifest that I have for this. Okay, I've used the storage permission in the past. It might have something to do with it. The active tab is there. And then the scripts, matches, documents, start. That should be all of it. Let's see if none of it. Inspect the element again, keep an eye on both consoles. Okay, so that was the issue. In order to, it looks like in order to have communication between these different JavaScript contexts, we need to add the storage permission in the manifest.json. Makes no sense to me, but it needs to be done. So whenever we click on the change colors button, we get a message from content.js from this part of the code, right? The Chrome runtime on message. And we're going to see the request, the sender, and the send response, which are the request is just change colors true, which was the message that we sent. The sender, we're getting an idea and an origin. These don't mean much to us right now, but when you start building more complex Chrome extensions and you have like more complex messaging architecture, I think these IDs start to be important. And then we see that send response is a function. So we can call send response in order to pass something back to whoever sent us the message. So all we need to do at this point is to just call the doStyleChange function from here when we receive the message, right? So we can just say doStyleChange, and whenever we're going to receive a message, So whenever we click on the button, the style should be changing. So I'm going to reload the extension. I'm going to refresh this page, open up the extension, click on the button, and we're getting an error. Okay, so it says cannot read property, style of undefined, do style change. Okay, first let's make sure that it's happening just because it's from the incoming message. I'm gonna press on the key Q and see if things change. So the function itself works. Which means that there's an issue with calling do style change from inside of the listener. Let's see. Oh, I see. I forgot to, yep, exactly. Thank you, Michelle. That's exactly what happens. We forgot to give it an element. All right, so do style change for the document.body. Oops. Let's reload the extension. Let's refresh our page. Open up the UI, click on change colors. Boom, that worked. All right, any questions so far? I think, yeah, this is all of the material that I had. Sorry for running over time. I'll be around for however long if you'll have questions or technical issues or anything.